It looks like we are live.
Cool. It's beautiful when these things work, Vlad.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that we've spent, so many sessions figuring out the technology that now it seems to be plug and play, quote unquote,
It
or
does.
press play and good to go, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much awesome. So I see us live on LinkedIn, saying hey to everyone. Um, we will start off. We'll start off saying hey to everyone. We'll have some community comments.
On
Hey, how's it
LinkedIn.
going? Frank,
Saying hey to
thanks for coming in. I am interested, kind of the continuation of my question last week, as to if you guys are watching on LinkedIn and you see this differently. LinkedIn changed how it looks on my side. Does it look different for you? They kind of pushed a live and an event in together, which is positive because it means I don't have to separately build all of those things. But on the flip side, it means that it has literally changed how everything looks on my side. And I don't know if it's for a positive or not. And knowing LinkedIn, as soon as we figure out the answer as to if it's a positive or not, they will change it once again. So if you guys are watching, please drop kind of comments in there if it looks the same or if it looks different. And so, hey to everyone on LinkedIn and Solus PLC. As you guys saw from like the title and the thumbnail, Vlad and I are kind of giving an update. It has been it's weird, Vlad. So I think it's been like 4 months since the last time that you and I did one together. I think episode 16 was the last one that we did together.
Yeah, and
And
I think we
I
kept saying, that we would do one like once a month or something like
yeah,
that, but we've
yeah,
been able to secure some very interesting people to speak with. So I think we've been
absolutely.
pushing this over week after week.
Yeah. And I know Vlad has talked about some of the things that he's doing. But I think we've all been so busy. It's like, okay, let's get a theme. And we've just had so many guests. Like we had the engineering, like career paths in manufacturing that went like six or seven episodes long just because we continued to find amazing guests. And so thank you guys for being with us. And kind of as part of that, we love to do kind of the chats and the questions. And so I will ask early and we will ask often if you guys have thoughts as to, questions, things that you guys want us to update either on the show or how business is going or kind of any of those things. Yeah, but with that, we'll go to the normal community comments. So first, my favorite part of the show, Vlad runs a fairly successful YouTube channel called Solus PLC. Hey, Solus PLC. You guys are what, like at 24,000 subscribers, something like
Yeah,
that?
it looks like we just reached the 24K. Yeah.
Congratulations, Vlad and Karim, on that. And so you guys have hit 24K. We are on the push to 100,000. It may be a 2022 thing for all of us here, but we need a silver play button going on in this app. We need a silver play button here, kind of anywhere. That is the number one thing the show is missing, other than that and like semi-professional hosts. But no, so if you guys haven't yet, please feel free to go ahead and do the whole like and subscribe. So is PLC. And if you're listening to us online, like go rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. I think it's been 16 episodes or since I regularly asked that last. So please go ahead, give us the thumbs up, kind of do all of those things. Some exciting news. Preston Hadley's Change Life giveaway just ended, and Brian Cox, longtime listener of the show, won. So, Brian, if you listen to this, congratulations to that. Thank you, Preston and Siemens, for helping us put that together. And by us, I mean thank you guys for putting that together. I had like nothing to do with it. And thank you, Vlad, for putting out all of that amazing content surrounding that. I think that it's very interesting, very valuable. Now, if nothing, I think Brian is fairly well versed, or at least knows Siemens TIA portal, so he may be able to skip episode 1 of that. But if you don't know TIA portal, I think that's episode 1 or episode 2 of the Solus PLC most recent playlist. Beyond that, as you guys heard, Copia Automation sponsored us for the last theme, they had some exciting news that came out today or yesterday. They raised their Series A, which I believe was $16.5 million.
Hmm.
And so, if you guys have seen those guys scale astronomically, just a shout out, thank you to those guys, and a congratulations to them on raising what that looks like. And then one last comment, Frank Lamb, who's in the comments. Hey, once again, Frank. Frank is hosting an interesting Mastering the Machine. He's going to talk about microcontrollers, SoCs, and SBC devices. Yeah, you guys should check that out. That goes live on his Zoom link on Friday morning. I have posted the link to his update in the comments there, and that should be a very interesting show. And I think he's going to put together a series or a theme kind of surrounding that. So you guys should check that. Vlad will go ahead and post it onto the Solus PLC. I know it goes live on, I believe, Automation Academy. Frank, correct me if I'm wrong. It goes live on Automation Academy's YouTube, which is a very good YouTube. And yeah, maybe we'll have to talk to Frank about taking some of that content and repurposing that. I think it's going to be a very interesting series that he is putting together.
I could be wrong, but usually Frank does like a Zoom call on which
Mhm.
people can join and kind of pitch in ideas and whatnot
Mhm.
during the live
Yep.
filming, and then he processes the video and posts it on his YouTube channel. But that comes, I think, a couple of days later.
A couple of
But
days later. Yeah.
he should have the Zoom link on his post.
Absolutely. But no. So, Vlad, I want to talk to you about some microcontrollers. It's kind of a continuation of last episode. But first, we would like to officially welcome everyone to the Automation Hub with me, Dave, and this guy over here, Vlad. Again, it has been 16 weeks since Vlad and I have kind of given you guys updates about everything. And we are excited to and we're excited to talk about kind of everything that has been going on with us, the show, answer your questions, and go from there. So no, thank you all very much. I guess we don't have a guest, so Vlad, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. I think it would be appropriate maybe to give some updates as as you mentioned on the podcast where we're trying to go. I know that we've been talking a lot about themes in the background, and the way I think we've tried to structure it is that every single month would have a theme. And obviously that takes a little bit of time, a little bit of planning, reaching out to the appropriate parties to make sure that they obviously provide value to the listeners. And I think the idea that we're sticking with coming up in a couple of weeks is going to be systems integrators. So again, I don't think we have it like 100% confirmed, but it's definitely a very interesting topic to me. So speaking with people who are running systems integration companies, and we've done so in the past, right? As part of even the Copia sponsorship, we've talked to multiple people, including David from Loop. We talked to Francisco from what is it, Automation Ecuador.
Solutions Ecuador, ASE.
Exactly. And so I think those conversations have been really interesting because we learn, and I guess everybody at the same time benefits. We learn about different technologies. We're trying to figure out what they're doing, how they're
Mhm.
advancing their business. And I think it's a lot of interest, especially, for myself, because it's trying to grow from again, there are different paths and stages of their enterprise, but it gives me maybe ideas on how to grow in the technical space. So that's, I think, very relevant to many individuals. And I think a lot of people aspire to, at some point, go off on their own. And if not, at least they get a feel of what it takes to run a company, and thus they can either understand the dynamics, how to get to the next career position, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the next theme that we're thinking about. As
Yep.
Dave mentioned, we've gotten a sponsorship from the previous one. We're still talking to a few individuals for sponsoring the systems integration theme, so that hasn't been finalized or announced. As we get closer, we can definitely share that information. But yeah, so that's going to be following a similar format to the episodes. Dave mentioned that we missed a couple, and that's completely on me. So we've been posting regularly on Thursdays if you've been following the last couple of weeks, but we've missed a couple of episodes that we filmed prior to last month, so that should be up. The other thing I wanted to mention, some of these like little items, or if you want to hear about guests, like where to find them, find their LinkedIn. So on manufacturing hub.live, there's a guests section. And typically, if you want to, connect or reach out to some of those individuals, there's going to be a link to their LinkedIn, to their company, and so you can find more information about them if you have. Again, I think we've talked a lot about companies that are hiring in the automation space, and I believe that it's very valuable to the listeners, but it may not always be obvious where to locate them. So if you go on manufacturinghub.live
Mhm.
slash guests or click on the tab on the very top, you'll be able to find all the guests. You'll be able to find the companies, so when they mention we are hiring, you can see where the link is if you're listening to this after the LinkedIn and the YouTube broadcast. Dave, anything else that we want to discuss or mention about the podcast specifically?
I mean, I think kind of the number one thing is we want to thank everyone
Mhm.
for continuing to stick with us. So as we probably mentioned, episode 1 or 2 or 3, this was kind of a off the cuff comment nearly a year ago that was like, "Hey, should we try something?" And it turned into us spending so many hours trying to figure it out, and then we did it the first time, and we're like, "Man, this is so much fun!" So thanks everyone for sticking with us, episode 32 episodes, 33 episodes, whatever number we're at. Thank you to everyone, for thank you for everyone for continuing to watch this. We are absolutely looking to grow the podcast, the show. Vlad and I are talking about a couple of giveaways, some fun things as a way to, give back and thank everyone for watching it. If you guys have thoughts, so we've reached the point where we've got, a couple of thousand views every week on the live videos, and we are looking at expanding what we're doing on the podcast side, especially for people that are podcast listeners and maybe don't want to sit in front of a LinkedIn and watch us talk for an hour. So we're looking at some different ways to do that. But if you guys have thoughts, we're absolutely always interested to kind of hear your thoughts and your feedback, either live now, or please feel free to drop either of us a message. We're absolutely interested in doing that. And then on the off chance, if there are additional sponsors that we have not had conversations with and you guys want to reach out, we kind of sort of have a package put together that we can actually send back, and we don't have to go and refigure everything out, which I suppose is what makes us semi-professional podcasters at this point, Vlad. But no, I think kind of to start off, to finish that thought is thank you to everyone for being here and listening. I'm not sure. I'm not sure Vlad and I could listen to us for as long as you guys have listened to us go through the interviews. And again, thank you to all the guests who have made this such a good time.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm always on the lookout for good quality like manufacturing podcasts. I know that I listen to a lot of the content Tim Wilborn puts out, because it's
Yeah.
more on the technical side. So I always
Mhm.
like to see how things are done by engineers. Frank Lamb, as you mentioned, Dave
Mhm.
is putting out content, I think, semi regularly. There's also Sam, who talks more about ERP, who spoke with us, a few episodes back. But no, always on the lookout if you guys have any other suggestions. I think that would be fantastic. But Dave, what I'm curious to dive into the meat of this episode.
Mhm.
What have you been up to? Let's say when's the last time we spoke? So 4 months. What have you been up to for the last 4 months?
Man, we've been busy, Vlad. I
Mm-hmm.
think that I think so. 4 months ago, we were talking about different opportunities, and we've done a series of engagements. So I think I described what we were doing with discoveries or road mappings, and so we've gone through and done a couple of those with clients. We are finishing up another one or two, and I don't know, probably like the next 36 hours. And so those are going well, as is the goal. It kind of gives us all the ability to kind of figure out what next steps look like. And so we've moved forward into larger engagements with a couple, and we've helped move some other people to groups who can help satisfy kind of their needs or help put them on the path internally to do the work that they need to do. We are working on a couple of implementations. I'm not sure I can talk about any of them at the moment because they are in process. So we're working on a training coaching program for some instruments, or for some electricians and instrument techs. A lot of that specifically revolving around problem solving. and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what are the issues with downtime. That is kind of the first step in what we can brand as like a larger digital transformation project for that company. That is one of those projects that we agree to do it in, I don't know, 10 weeks, a year and a half ago. And now we're here. And we are hopefully going to get those finished up in the relative near future. And then we are working on one or two other implementations, a lot of like data visualization and processes, which is kind of the continuation, re-implementation of a couple of our discovery road mappings that we had talked about as well. So we've been very busy, especially the last month or 6 weeks. It seems like if I could spend 5 more hours a day in front of Zoom calls and writing reports, I would spend 5 more days in front of Zoom calls and writing reports. And as I think everyone, or as many people who know me know, we have been nomadic for nearly the last 5 years. And so we are back in Western New York, up near Buffalo. And so we've seen lots of friends and family, but we've also gone out to at least a couple of clients to work with them during the time that we're here. And so the time that we spend in Western New York is always the busiest, both personally and professionally. And so this year has absolutely not stopped that. And so we're happy to be here, and we're going to spend, I think, most of the rest of the month of October back up here before it may or may not start snowing on us, and we start heading south. But no, that's kind of the basic general updates.
As I, kind of ask the question with all of our guests, but I started with the I can expand on many things in that statement, right? But
Yep.
I like I guess, like you mentioned, the first project, and I think, for the purpose of not really going into the specifics of your project, I think there's a lot of changes, and we've discussed this on, previous episodes. There's a lot of changes happening, I think, in the automation industry from the training slash maybe like upskilling
Yep.
standpoint in general. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing? Like, what kind of challenges are you seeing? Not at that company
Mhm.
specifically, but in general, do you see, for example, these systems being deployed? I don't know if it's like OE, MES, and then
Mhm.
techs need to interact a lot more than they used to, or is
Mhm.
it, like what's the dynamic? Where are the changes where there needs to be that training?
Yeah, so those systems are absolutely systems that we do work with and we interact with. To back up a little bit for everyone that is not familiar with my concept of training, is that in my experience, over the last 5 or 10 years, I've seen many what we would call world-class systems be implemented. And the issue with those systems is that, I mean, to poke fun at us, the people that build the systems, is that we spend no time or have no budget to train. So we're going through the process of, we're going through the process, and an engineer is typing up an engineering PowerPoint slide on the way to the facility, and we deliver this to a bunch of generally not engineers. And then they're like, okay, good luck. And then it's kind of, you drop it in the lap and you go. So I would say that is kind of my general thought and issue with training, is that there are better ways, right?
Sure.
And I know, Tim, in the comments, Tim and I have certainly talked about this at least once, and I love what he and Amber are doing with their trainings. And so for me, that was kind of the general concept. And we do a fair amount of work with that, and training, and basically people understanding what systems are the very baseline of what should be, a digital transformation, of what should be any sort of initiative. Because especially the electricians and instrument techs, they're the ones who need to understand what normal operation is, so that they can go through the process of fixing uh, of fixing what is broken. And if they don't understand what normal operation is and how to work on things, then they're never going to be able to go through the process of fixing what is broken. And so this in particular is less of a so this first engagement is, we are building a series of modules. These modules have changed a few times, but they're basically centered around the organization's problem solving structure. And it's a fairly simple structure, right? And so a lot of what we're doing is talking about problem statement definition, like what is the problem? Let us define what the problem is, and then we can go through the process of figuring out what the issue is. And then that kind of compounds on top of the tools and other resources that they have internally and how we want to escalate the process internally. And so a lot of it is kind of building a baseline of this is how we uh, uh, a lot of it is building the baseline of this is how we go through and kind of fix and problem solve and troubleshoot. And I would say that we've had many of these conversations, and many of these conversations come from the fact that there are not, or I guess that there is a lot of turnover. There are not a lot of people
Right.
who have the technical and system and facility understanding to be able to go through and successfully do these. And then we've, of that small number, there are generally a smaller number of those people who in our manager supervisor role, and probably even a smaller number thereof. So very few people actually want to go through the process of training someone with no experience. It kind of goes back to a couple of posts that I had made earlier this week. One of the things we talked with Jay Call a few episodes back is that every facility is looking to hire, and many of them are hiring at 20, 24, $25 an hour, and they've got signing bonuses because you literally cannot find people. And the theme that we've seen for the last 10 plus years of operators, or someone is going to be at a facility for 6 months and then they might get an extra dollar or two offer somewhere else, or they may decide they don't want to come into work, and then you lose those people. And so I've worked with many facilities, especially around large cities, that an operator averaged 6 months out of the year. So in addition to kind of resetting that baseline, the goal is how do we build sustainable tools, sustainable training, how do we build that so that the next person and the next 5 people and the next 10 people can come and reuse that, and they can watch and read and understand what we're doing, to maybe not get them to the 100% of the way of sitting through the entire training, but to get them to the point of, okay, I now understand, and I can now understand where we're at, what I'm supposed to do, the tools I'm supposed to use, the people I'm supposed to talk to, and I also know the people to talk to and escalate the problem to when there are problems that I don't know, or that the operators are brand new and so they don't know what the normal so they don't know what normal function looks like. And if they don't know what normal function looks like, it just becomes very difficult for all of us. So it's kind of the step-by-step process to set the baseline, and then above that we've got a bunch of tools, digital and otherwise, that we're going to use and leverage to help kind of bring a lot of those computers, a lot of those kind of, we'll call them legacy tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
Onto the plant floor. As I like to say, it's one of those issues that we go through, and up until the point that we walk into the facility, we're the smartest person in the world because we've got a smartphone in our pocket. But as soon as we walk into the facility, the phones go away and we just kind of lose all of this technology. So part of it is certainly how can we leverage the technology that people already know and use it on the plant floor.
And when I guess you mentioned tools a couple of times. I'm
Mhm.
assuming it's going back to kind of the Lean Six Sigma methodologies, and using like the 5 whys, the fishbone diagrams. Like those are
Mhm.
kind of the operational, or at least tools that operators would typically use, right?
Yeah, so we absolutely, we certainly will leverage some of the lean and Six Sigma tools, especially the 5 whys, especially the fishbone diagrams
Yep.
as needed. I would say a lot of the tools are the internal knowledge base that we're building,
Hmm.
are the O&M manuals, are the tech support, are the kind of all of the structure. A lot of it kind of as the baseline is alarming and historian. So
And I mean,
many
that's
times.
super underrated. Like, sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
your train of thought, but again, like, the knowledge base of problems, or I guess like of what has been done to solve a certain problem,
Yep.
instead of just, again, like you've mentioned, a lot of times a problem would be solved, we just
Mhm.
walk away without
Yep.
taking the time to write it down. And if that's not the procedure that's enforced by management, it's very easy, right, to get caught in this, like, I guess, habit of never
Hmm.
doing it, because again, you're not really paid to document what has been solved. You're typically paid to be on the production line and make sure things are running. And so, anyways, it's
Absolutely.
really easy to cut corners. And so if you don't, then 3 months later, the same problem comes back, and here we got like 2 more days of downtime because of that
Yep.
same issue. But
No, no,
I really like that.
absolutely. And I would say it's not even not enforced, especially, many Fortune 500, Fortune 5,000 companies that I've worked with, like it just doesn't exist. And so you
Sure.
ask, okay, what are you doing to document? And there's just like crickets
Right.
from, managers. So a lot of it is kind of building tools and structure in place so that we can build on top of all of that. I have a customer who likes to call it blocking and tackling, and this is very much kind of the basics of blocking and tackling for all the American football fans out there. Is, we need to learn the basics, and then we can put the basics into the knowledge base, and then we can bring all of the cool fun tools and gadgets and augmented reality and kind of all of that onto the plant floor. But the first thing we need to do is build some structure, get them to do it on paper. Then once we've got them to do it on paper, we can go through and get them to do it digitally, and then they can search the knowledge base, and then we can build on top of it. Many of the people that we work with are not of the same engineering mindset
Sure.
of the people that build the systems. And so a
Yeah.
lot of it is understanding kind of the people who are using and working on the systems, and then building systems and training so that they can understand. We kind of have to understand who they are so that we can communicate with them in the ways that they best understand.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I completely agree with you that the baseline needs to be correct. That being said, and I'm sure like you've seen this probably in your years as well. But when such, I would say again, like I'll give an example, right? So some of the 5Y tools were implemented in, let's say like lower end facilities that I've been to. And typically what happens is that management tries to incentivize reporting problems, right? But what that
Hmm.
creates is a culture where, let's say, your operator is, I would say, not like compensated by, but how do you say it? Like he's incentivized to report more problems rather than spending time to do it properly, right? And so what that
Hmm.
creates is that people just stack piles and piles of 5Y sheets. Again, like digitizing, not
Hmm.
digitizing,
Yeah.
that's like a whole different like
Yeah.
point. But they would, just bring in copies upon copies of 5Ys. Like, here I
Hmm.
found this problem, here I found that problem here, but not really going through, the process and thoroughly understanding where that problem lies, whether they solved it or not. But I
Hmm.
think it's equally as important, once you obviously finish the groundwork and set the base in, to make sure that the right like mindset slash education maybe is put into
Hmm.
place to make sure that people use the tools correctly. Because even myself, like when I was first introduced to these tools, I remember I was thinking like, oh, like, well, this is like manufacturing stuff, like I'm kind of like smarter than that, right? It's not something I would find like extremely beneficial. But there's a lot of variations, and I think as you go through the tools very properly and methodically, you
Hmm.
realize how critical they are, right? Like I think like that there's like a maybe a switching point of, when you enter manufacturing in whichever capacity, to how long it takes you to realize like how important this is to be part of, this
Hmm.
like giant machine that is like an industrial plant or whatever,
Hmm.
to keep it running where it needs to be. And the top level manufacturing facilities have this almost dialed in, right? Like they know that it's important, they know how to execute, they have all these systems in place, and people have the mentality of taking the time to do them right. So,
Hmm. No, no, absolutely. I would agree with that, and I think that it's one of those things that come with experience and age. Is the it it makes more sense, and at the end of the day, we have to do it right as opposed to doing it fast, and that's one of those things that we've talked about extensively over the course of especially this training that we're building, because it's the basics, right?
mhm,
Is what does the difference look like between the one time we did it right, but it cost us 50 hours of downtime, because, or no, the one time we did it fast, but it cost us 50 hours of downtime, and then we had to reverse everything that we did fast 4 or 5 days later to then do it right, which would have taken an extra 15 seconds in the beginning. But because we didn't go through the process to check and verify, it became, 50 hours of downtime and I don't know, $5 million or whatever it costs for the facility. And it's one of those, you have to go back to the basics. And
Yep.
it's as we go through the process, there are more tools, there are more other things that we can do to kind of check this. But at the end of the day, a lot of times, like just a checklist to go through, or kind of a format, which is one of the things that we've done and built, is necessary because even 50 years into it, like sometimes you just skip steps, right? Like sometimes you accidentally miss something and you still have to go back and be like, oh, it's not working because I didn't scale the input, for instance.
Yep.
And you feel kind of silly, but that's why airline pilots have checklists. Airline pilots have checklists to make sure they do the same thing every time so that you don't leave a cover on the pitot tube, or you don't accidentally leave a couple of big covers on the engines. And you do that so you make sure it performs the same way every time, and it's safe to fly.
No, absolutely. I think those documents are key. Again, I mean, personally, I'll forget what I ate for lunch yesterday, right? And so the earlier I think in your career that you'll learn, I guess, to accept the way your flaws are, the
Mhm.
sooner you'll be able to try and like compensate in some ways, right? And for me, let's say it's documentation, right? So whenever I learn something, whenever I try to, that I know I'm going to reutilize, and I have a good example of this. So there's a PLC Q&A, PLC Talk forum. I don't know if you're part
Mhm.
of that,
Yeah.
but I remember there was a problem with a communication protocol. It was an older PLC that I couldn't connect to, and so I figured it out, and I actually posted on that thread because
Mhm.
nobody had found the solution.
Yep.
So I'm like, oh, whatever. Like I'm gonna type this out, just two paragraphs. And so 4 months later, the exact like same problem occurred, and I had like completely forgotten that I even worked on that. Right. So naturally, I started searching online, like how do I connect to this old PLC, and I found the thread, right? Like I googled the same
Mhm.
problem, I found the thread, and I'm like, oh my god, like I answered this question 4 months ago. And so in manufacturing, I think it's the exact same thing, right? The more you can build up, like you were saying, that knowledge base, that just like documentation. And again, there's obviously like bad ways, like you can for sure overdo it and try to like over document everything and spend probably thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars just like sitting there documenting. But as problems arise, you enter them into a centralized database. You make sure that the person that will encounter the same problem knows, and that will save you money and time in the long run. I've seen it being implemented very
Mhm.
well in multiple facilities, and they've been nothing but happy with how that turned out. And again, I think in manufacturing, there's a lot of standard operating procedures, right? As you were saying, checklists. How do we do,
Mhm.
I don't know, basic like lubrication or going back
Yep.
to center lines? What does that look like? So somebody that comes in and gets hired, it's one thing to have someone senior explain to them, but it's a whole other thing that they can just look up a document while they're there doing their job on what it
Yep.
takes. You know what I mean? So it's for sure like an interesting discussion. I think we're gonna see more and more of that. I think that as we, how to say it, digitally transform, to use the buzzword, but ultimately just bring in more technology, it's going to be even more important. Because I think, again, operators are starting to work with robotics that are not just pure, let's say, like robot arms. You have like
Mhm.
delta robots, you have AGVs. So you're starting to
Mhm.
introduce so much technology that all of that will require some form of documentation. And it's not going to be enough, as you were saying, for someone who's going to turn over in 6 months to
Mhm.
just have a senior guy walk them through, because that's all they'd be doing all day, every day, right?
No, absolutely. Internal documentation, internal knowledge bases, especially when you get the opportunity to kind of talk to someone who is more senior. If you go and you talk to an end user and you get the expert in the system at the end user, you should videotape it, you should record it, you should transcribe it, whatever that looks like. You should make sure you have that knowledge, because you will at some point in the future not remember that, because this is the one person who knows the system best, and you're 1,000 problems later before it comes back to you. So no, I would agree, and I would say kind of building knowledge bases. One of the things that I like, especially about many systems integrators and stuff like that, probably not all that different to some of the large posts that you put out at Solus, Vlad, is you go and you document kind of the solutions to the problems, and even if it's ugly with a couple of screenshots and you post it, there's been more
I'd
than
like to think
once.
it's beautiful, but
I mean, Vlad, no one can. When you are looking to solve the problem, you are so happy that someone documented the problem online. You don't care what it looks like.
fair
The
enough.
the only the only embarrassing part is, as you mentioned, when you'll find the problem that you solved and documented 4 months ago. That's the only, and you're not even the first person that I know who has done that before, right? Like, the thing gets documented, the thing gets posted, you don't think about it, and 3 years later you're Googling it, and you're the top, you're the top three responses on Google, because you're the only one who has ever documented it. But it's one of those things that I think that we need to do better as an industry. I know a number of groups that have private YouTubes or have private Vimeos or other things where they kind of capture and keep a lot of that. And I think it's important to keep. I think it's important to keep that and have that. And I think building that knowledge and that structure within a variety of different groups is important and will continue to be important. At every OEM, at every end user location, especially as we're going to see a huge group. All of the old guard, they're all going to retire in the next 5, 6, 7 years, and when they retire, there's not that large group of people who have 40 years of or 30 years of industry experience who can then go and kind of fill those shoes. So there will be a huge gap. And there will absolutely be a huge gap in knowledge that we as an industry are going to struggle with, no matter how much effort we put in the next 5 years. Like, we're going to struggle. The question that I ask people is, do you want to struggle, or do you want to not know how to run your facility? And I think I think that's a very realistic question for many people. 5, 6, 7 years from now, Vlad.
Yeah, especially if you have those, like relay-based cabinets that only one guy at your facility knows the layout of, and like scratches, when like the current jumps from relay to relay, he has to like scratch off that mark so that it keeps running. But no, I completely agree. I think, like I said, knowledge is going to become very, very important. I think it's also, again, like we've talked about in the last few episodes, it's not inherently a new concept, right? Like in software, there's a lot of documentation. If you go to anything that's released by a reputable company, you'll see that their documentation is nearly impeccable. It talks about different variations in the system. Again, there's obviously some flaws. There's always some things to be worked on, but ultimately it talks about what the system has been tested on, what version of software does this work with. And so if you don't have that in place for human operations, it becomes also very challenging to again, it's just time lost, right? Like somebody trying to figure this out, just like you would with a software package that hasn't been properly documented. So I don't think we're, like you were saying, we're going back to the basics and make sure that those are right versus like reinventing the wheel, but we are leveraging some of these, I guess, like different newer ways to make it easier on people, to make it more accessible. I think, again, if we go back to the current state of, I would say, like upbringing, you're raised with a tablet in your hands pretty much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you would be a lot more versed than I would. Let's say I still take my notes on pen and paper, but you're a lot more used to, as an operator, to using an iPad, and so it makes more sense to that. There you go. See, well,
I had to flip out of the actual notes. I had to flip out of the actual notes, but no, I'm still a
no.
big fan of taking notes, uh, pen and paper.
No, and I mean, like, again, it could be both ways. Digitization doesn't mean that we eliminate something entirely. It just means we adapt it better to the industry, to the people. So, maybe to jump into a logical transition from that entire conversation, Dave.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on the on the hiring procedures as of like right now, because I see, so we follow Jordan, that came and
Hmm.
talked to us. I also have contact out of California, Christopher Merida. You're probably connected with him
I
also.
think so.
But there's a lot of hiring going on in automation
Hmm.
specifically. I think there's many positions. Is this driven by the market? Is this driven by people leaving to do different things? Like what's really going on? And again, maybe we'll talk about like engineering and like lower management type
Yeah.
of personnel.
Yeah, so like in my mind, I kind of segregate it in a couple of different groups. Like I think that there's always been a need at the operator level
Hmm.
um, for more. There's always been a need for more operators or operators who will have the 40 or 50 years of longevity, which just isn't a thing. I would say like at the engineer and control system engineer developer level, lots of systems integrators, we're kind of seeing the backlash of, I don't know, like 16 or 18 months ago when COVID started happening and we started laying off a lot of people because facilities started slowing down. And so people were laying off some amount of talent and there was a glut of talent on the market. And then kind of manufacturing started picking back up and we needed more people, so we hired them, and manufacturers have money. The ones that are doing well seem to be doing very well, so they have more money, so they want to build more, they want to automate more, or they're forced to automate more with the lack of physical human beings they can get within facilities. And so I think a lot of it is there is desire for talent that is just not on the market. I think that there is people are desirous of, this other group of folks that have 10 years of industry experience and are looking to go take a job, and I generally don't think they exist. Are there some out there? Absolutely. But I would imagine most of them are gainfully employed. And then you're looking to hire them away from a group. And if the group has treated them well, especially like over COVID, they're probably not going to leave. But if they haven't been treated well, or maybe they're looking to make a move, or maybe the other company is offering them, plus 25% salary, then I certainly think that there are opportunities. So I see a lot of people wanting to do a lot of work in manufacturing and automation who would theoretically need, large chunks of people to do it. And just generally speaking, I think that we are getting very close to the point that they're desirous for people that don't necessarily exist. And if they do exist, there's not a huge chunk of them. So I think that there's
Hmm.
almost a push to get more people who understand, PLC programming, more people to kind of upskill from that maybe E&I tech level to more of an engineer level. I think that it's also the issue of we churn engineers so fast at facilities. If you guys listen to Jim Gavigan, who was on one of our earlier episodes, he and I talk about this probably at least once a month. And you just see churns, and many times by the time you get an engineer up and running on a problem and you go through training and you go back 3 or 4 years later to train on the same style of system again, most of those engineers are gone and they've either left to go to facilities that are in a better location, or they've left the industry, or they've risen in management. And so there's just not the consistency that one would have of a subject matter expert in many of those facilities. And honestly, we're not pushing out enough new engineers or engineers that have co-ops like we've talked about in previous episodes. We're not pushing out enough people that have the skills or desire to go into manufacturing, because at the end of the day, manufacturing is still seen as, the dirty old thing that, dad and granddad did. And yeah, what are you seeing, Vlad?
I mean, I see a ton of postings, but I wanted to ask you about the skills. So you've mentioned like PLC and HMI programming. Are you seeing like different skills as well? Like, are you seeing more demand for like MES data type of like application skills, or are you seeing like any change whatsoever, or is it still just supporting like facilities in their like standard operations on the control systems? And I guess like robotics could be thrown into the mix because I think that's
Mm.
certainly growing. if we follow the report, right, like Fanuc, I think every year releases how many arms have been sold in North America, or somebody publishes that, and
Yep.
that's been steadily growing. So again, I'm wondering if you're seeing maybe a higher concentration of a specific skill set, or it's just generalized automation engineers.
Yeah, I think that kind of the specialized skills have been in demand for 5 or more years. Looking for an MES or looking for an OSI soft Pi or looking for robot. Someone with FANUC experience. You can even getting into maybe like motion control and things like that. I
Hmm.
think that those skills have been in demand for years, and I don't necessarily want to call them recession proof, but during the height of the pandemic, many of the people that I were talking to that were super busy, um, the many of the people that I was talking to that were super busy, um, turned at that I can't talk. Many of the people that I was talking to that were super busy, were doing robotic arms or they were doing motion control or they were doing something like that. And I think that those people are very busy on a regular basis. So I think that the demand for those skills, the skills that are harder to come by, the skills that require more experience, have generally been there for many years. I think they've generally been there for many years, and those are only going to get harder, and those companies are only going to be in more demand, and those people are only going to be in more demand because those are exactly the groups that we are looking for and need to talk to and work with. And yes,
Yeah, I mean, on my side, I see a lot of, again, maybe it depends on my connections and just the circle of influence, but I see a lot of discussions around like digital transformation gets thrown around more and more. I think companies are trying to centralize, again, their analytics. Everyone's trying to, and again, more so than before the pandemic at least, but everyone's trying to leverage quote unquote AI, machine learning, to get some more information out of their operations. So I see more demand for MES engineers, engineers who understand not just, again, not the automation side, but a lot more of the IT side, right? Like networking is becoming a lot more problematic for a lot of companies, right? Because
absolutely.
and it's not, again, like this is not a new phenomenon. I just think that the pandemic somewhat accelerated the nature of things, and so everyone wants their plant to be fully connected. Everyone wants to work remotely, for better or for worse, and so what that requires is being able to get your network up and running and all your devices connected, as one would expect, many facilities were doing. But I think now they fully understand like the need of having that in place. And like we talked about, you bring in like 10 robotic arms. Well, something needs to control that. There's like PLCs associated with that, and that becomes very quickly a complicated project, not just from having them on the floor, but also who do they communicate to from like a data standpoint, like who troubleshoots them, who's going to remote in to check up on these
Absolutely.
arms. So anyways, that's just kind of what I'm seeing happening based
No,
on the people
absolutely.
I talked to.
Let me turn it around, Vlad. You are always the one who asks the best question. So let me turn it around. I want to make sure that we can devote some time to you. And I would imagine like every week we will once again go beyond the hour that we have allotted. But Vlad, what have you been up to? I think you guys have been busy, very busy with Solus. I know that you guys are working on some stuff with Joeltech. I don't know how much of it you can talk about, but what have you guys been up to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll take a step back. Again, I don't remember our previous conversation and where we were, but
Mhm.
I finished my MBA degree in May,
Yeah.
right? So I finished that and essentially transitioned to working full time on Solus PLC slash Joltech, right? That's still in place. And so there's a couple of main activities. So on the content side for Solus PLC, so we've been a lot more consistent on producing new content both in video and written form. We started working with companies again that really fit the what we're looking to showcase to our
Yeah.
readers and our viewers. And so we've been trying to build content with them as you mentioned, the PLC giveaway that
Mhm.
Preston did. So we've partnered with Siemens and started working on some content with them, and so that's been very interesting because I think what I would typically underestimate is the amount of time it takes to learn a new platform, right? And so I've learned Alan Bradley, I would say, very naturally through work, but it did take a couple of years before I could say, like, well, I am comfortable, and I'm still not always comfortable, right? When you go to a new facility, there's always going to be questions, but ultimately it takes a lot of time to learn something and then to be able to present it to an audience that's also looking to understand what is going on. And so, yeah, like I said, we've partnered up with them, and I had to learn a lot of the Siemens TIA portal programming, which has been extremely interesting. There's a lot of very neat features, and I talk about them in the videos if you're curious to check that out on the YouTube channel. But it's definitely something that I look to continue doing. So I've reached out to a couple of companies to talk about IO links. So I'm assuming you're familiar with the protocol. I'm definitely, like, I've heard a lot of pitches at conferences. I've never seen it in play. So I've actually gotten a few demo kits, and so we'll be taking a look at, that technology. I also have a lot of interest in on the application side. So we've talked about, the sponsor that we had last month. We've talked about a few different applications other than that too. So on the SCADA side, on the OE side, I'm exploring a few applications through what's it called, Ignition. So Ignition has a very interesting package called Sepasoft. So
Mhm.
they're a module for OE, MES, and just general plant analytics. If you're not familiar with that, if you're listening, and so I'm very curious, on how we can build some content for such applications, because I think there's a general lack of such content. So, anyways, that's kind of like Solus PLC. We're building content both on YouTube. We're building content on the website. We're trying to find, again, like, key partners that would be interested in helping us with the learning curve, because I think it's very important, and that's like one of the realization, like I've kept mentioning, we had with Siemens, is that if you have a partner that understands the technology well and you can learn through them, and then you can portray the hardware slash software in the best light, I think it makes a lot more sense than for me to spend, time researching myself and then trying to explain it. And then
Mhm.
on the Joltec side, so Joltec, I guess, to summarize, it's the arm of Solus PLC where we do more of systems integration type of work. I couldn't tell you that we've done a lot, but we did work on a project for, again, so this was open during ICC and it was mentioned during a live demo, so I think I can talk about it openly for a Phoenix Contact. So just having a demo of the PLC Next starter kit. I have it actually sitting, I don't know how well you can see it, it's right there.
Oh.
So this PLC Next starter kit was connected through an MQTT broker into an AWS instance that was running Ignition and a few other software packages to display some simulation of a plant. And so that was a very fun project. I learned quite a bit. We're actually uh, working or starting to work with PLC Next to kind of develop some more videos and tutorials on that platform as well. But yeah, the idea was to pass some data to that instance to showcase, that you can load a lot of these. So we used Node-RED to pass the MQTT data that was originally in OPC UA to the broker. So just kind of showing some proof of concept and feasibility through these hardware platforms that are,
Mhm.
I think, again, we've talked about Opto 22, which has a similar capability. I think the platforms are going to fall into like different applications, so it's going to be really interesting to see where they will be used in manufacturing, because they have their own advantages in their own regard. But yeah, that's kind of like what we've been doing. We had a conversation about so data. I think, again, if I can maybe take a minute and explain what I'm trying to figure out. So I've spent a number of years working with manufacturing data, right? So the last 3 years that I've spent on the plant floor was always to figure out how can we send data through a data concentrator into this first of all, database, but then essentially a tool that would present those analytics to management, to operators, to like mechanics, electricians, whoever. And I think the biggest part, or the most complicated and time-consuming part, was always getting that data. And there's multiple, I think, like problems with that, and we can dive into a deeper discussion. But I feel in traditional systems integration, that is a key component to any system that you would have on like past the PLC side, right? So that's going to be your SCADAs, your MES systems, and reliable data is very difficult, and not only reliable but also contextual, right? So if you work in automation, you know that you need to understand programming, you need to understand hardware, you need to understand the process. So you spend a lot of time on the floor just trying to map out every single sensor going into your database. And so I'm trying to figure out a way on how that can be simplified. I couldn't tell you, Dave, that at this point, I have a solution or an answer. I only have theories and maybe like some application notes. I certainly think, after going through that exercise with Phoenix Contact, that I've gotten sold on the unified namespace idea because I think it solves several problems that I've seen in the industry, which is mainly giving the metaphorical, keys of the vehicle back to the enterprise versus allowing every systems integrator to create their own databases and then use that for their own applications, lock everybody out. But again, there's a lot of discussions to be had. I'm sure it's different depending on the industry, it's different depending on the plant, but that's just kind of my thinking process. And I really hope to explore this with some manufacturing plants. So I'm trying to have some conversations around what problems they're seeing in their facility and how we can come in and try to help them on that front.
No, absolutely. I like that. I think that is all very exciting. I would like to talk a little bit about the data collection and these pies and kind of the
Mm-hmm.
continuation of the last episode. But first, I like IO Link a lot. I think IO Link will be very good. So I
Mm-hmm.
worked for a number of years with Banner Engineering, and they do a lot of IO Link, and so does Turk, and so does IFM Effector. It's very much kind of the baseline of we can connect things, and then once the sensors are connected to gateways or other devices, we can then in theory kind of pull them in to all of the other solutions. So I would say IO Link is a positive. It is very much kind of the baseline of how do we put everything together for an industry 4.0 or digital transformation or any sort of data collection, data analytics initiative. So
Yep.
I think you will enjoy that. I'm sure we could talk for hours about it because I've spent weeks of my life talking about it. In the past, we're going to have to shake the head and rattle around to make sure we get that knowledge back to the top before we do. But we can absolutely talk about that some more. And I think that kind of the data initiative that you're talking about, I think that's very interesting. As Vlad, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure many of the listeners know, I've spent many years of my life kind of working down towards the same thing on
Yep.
similar problems and done similar solutions. And so I look forward to kind of continuing to have those conversations and see how that kind of continues down the process and what, if anything, we can talk about and share on the show to kind of get other thoughts and feedback, as there are many initiatives and routes one can go down for that. But beyond that, and kind of something that you talked a little bit about, something we talked about last week, and something that has been hotly contested, at least on my LinkedIn, and I think Frank's, because in the last couple of weeks, has been kind of the use of maybe call them non-industrial, not intentionally industrial solutions. So Vlad has some Raspberry Pis. So anyone who didn't listen last week with John, we kind of talked about pies versus not pies. Are they industrial grade? What happens when you go to use them in the plant facility? John was staunchly in he's nuked too many of them to consider ever using them again on the plant floor. I think Vlad was kind of on the other side. had many conversations. I've talked to some folks from Revolution Pi. I've talked to some other people about it, and I think it's interesting. And kind of to the point that you brought up last week, I think that it would be interesting if we could get some hardware in and find some sponsors or find some time to do some more testing, right? So we could test some of these things next to each other. Because so you've got the pies, which are the red things down by Vlad, and you have the industrial hardened pies, and you've got Siemens gateways, and those, to my understanding, are more in the like $200-ish range. And then kind of above those, you've got like a PLC Next, which I'm sure Vlad has floating around somewhere down by his feet, 4 or 5 dozen of those. And then you've also got the Opto 22 Rios and kind of other Linux style boxes. I'm just going to kind of lump them into Linux style boxes. And yeah, I think all of that is interesting. But what is kind of your thoughts? What is your thoughts on that, Vlad?
I mean, look, Dave, so first and foremost, I would define the scope of the project, right, and figure out the requirements. I think that's like the first step in any engineering endeavor, just in general. So, number one, if all you're looking for is to pass like 2, 3 tags and all you need is like a Linux-based platform, like maybe the cost is good enough for a Raspberry Pi, right? And again, we've talked about some cooling solutions that can be added on top of just the base board. There's more industrialized boards that you can buy as well at a slightly higher cost, maybe double, triple the 40, $50 for the Raspberry Pi. At the end of the day, the way I look at it, it's really defined by the application, right? If you start growing and like your entire plant needs to send data, then obviously you're not going to start putting Raspberry Pis in every single machine and cabinet, because that quickly becomes a mess, right? So
Yep.
I'm certainly not a proponent of doing more work, and again, doing work that may fail very quickly. So if that's
Mhm.
your case, if that's your requirement, well, maybe we should look into an entire server, right? Like that could be an
Mhm.
entire rack, like wall mounted, whatever, like we in a cold room, and properly ventilated. If you're looking to pull data from, again, if you have skids that you're some kind of an equipment manufacturer, well, maybe the cost, you can put a controller in there that would also control or like receive some data, right? So in that case, you can look at the OptoRio. And so OptoRio is like highly configurable. Again, I spent a little bit of time on it. I think it has up to 20 different IO points, and you can configure them. So if that's what you're looking for, that's what you're going to buy. If you're looking for more IO points, well, then maybe the Groove Epic or the PLC Next is going to
Mhm.
make more sense. And again, it really depends, I think, on the application side. And are you going to do control with that same device, or are you only going to pass data? Like, what exactly is the application? So the
Mhm.
way, to come back to what I'm trying to do with data, or the way I would like to approach this problem, is that it should be almost hardware agnostic, meaning that if you want to, again, pull 1 or 2 tags, it will tell you like, well, go ahead and buy a Raspberry Pi because this is going to be the most cost effective solution. It's going to tell you what the temperature of the Pi is, and if it overheats, then like you can add a cooler to it. If you're going to, again, deploy an entire plant, here's the server we can recommend. If you have multiple I don't know, case packer machines that you're looking to pull data from, well, maybe that's going to take like a something a little bit more robust, like an IPC that's going to be dedicated to that. So I'm not like advocating for one solution or another. I think it's really driven by your problem statement and what you're trying to solve, and that's just my aspect on almost every engineering, I would say, problem.
No, no, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate your thoughts on that. I think kind of for me, the one differentiating factor is the thought that the end user is going to be spending tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on this solution. Do we really want them to spend, call it $300,000 on a solution that at the base is a $30 Raspberry Pi? Because if we have an issue and we've got to fly out to the site to swap a $30 Raspberry Pi, and they're like, hey, we spent $250,000 on this system. Why do I have a $40 piece of hardware that my kid plays around with at home? For me, the perception is wrong, right? Like if you're going to charge $100 a month for this solution, then you're not going to be able to put a $5,000 IPC on there. But with the cost of everything, once you get to the point of, you call it a $40 board and you got a $20 cooler and you got $10 in a power supply and you've got $10 in a, box to put it in, and then you got $5 in a DIN rail, and then you put it all together and it takes an hour because it's so tiny. That then suddenly for me, every time I've done the math, it becomes doing it, more than once or twice. If we're going to go and push this out to production, buying something for 200 to $800 is a lot less expensive, especially if you can get them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to kind of comment on your initial point, I don't think you should be shortchanging the customer for
Mm-hmm.
sure. So definitely, if it's a large project, it's not something that I would put in. And again, like I said, I don't think I would recommend it unless. So the idea with this whole, like, again, going back to the data project, is that it would be open source, right? So if you're looking to pull some data in your facility just to play around, that's where you would put in a Raspberry Pi, right? And you're pulling some data, whatever, it's a non-commercial project. You're going to pull a couple of tags, and that's going to go into the cloud. Again, you can load very quickly Node-RED onto it and do whatever. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're going to build a several hundred thousands of dollar like development project and you send out Raspberry Pis, I think I completely agree with you. It's not going to look very good. And so, yeah, I would definitely look at a more robust solution. And I think in certain instances, it's fine to, how to say it, make the system overly robust in
Mm-hmm.
case there is expansion. Because a lot of times, from what I've seen, it starts off with, we want to pull in, I don't know, a couple of thousand tags from this line, and then very quickly it's like, oh, like, can we do this line as well? Like once the customer usually gets a taste of, I would say, good work and something that makes sense to them, they're going to typically ask for more. And so
Yep.
if you put in something that can handle more upfront, again, it doesn't have to be, if you're going to pull a couple hundred data points, you don't need to put in like an entire server rack for 50 grand.
Yep.
But at the very least, like, have some capacity to like maybe double what you're currently putting in. But again, I think it goes back to having a good discussion on the requirements, maybe asking the questions, well, what is this going to look like in 6 months to a year to
Mm-hmm.
3 years, versus just, making assumptions on your own and putting in whatever you think makes sense. But I don't think we disagree. I really think that we're on the same page. I think it's definitely a good tool. It's on the lower end, can be
Mm-hmm.
used for proof of concept and some like very basic applications, but ultimately there's much better hardware out there.
Oh, absolutely. I think for proof of concept and things like that, you're not going to get better, less expensive than that, and a couple of thermocouples or whatever sensors you're looking to pull in. So I
Yeah.
think I would absolutely agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. And the whole kind of rabbit hole that this has taken me down with the more ruggedized Revolution Pi and other things. And so, excuse me. So we've got Jeffrey in the comments, and he and I were talking over the last week about SD cards being a point of failure. And so we've had some people reach out talking about industrialized SD cards. This is a crazy rabbit hole that we have gone down, Vlad. And hopefully, at some point before the end of the year, we will have kind of an update inclusive in one of these episodes that we can talk about kind of the learnings that we have done and perhaps kind of the thoughts and processes on where this goes next. But no, do you have any other thoughts, Vlad? Do we want to continue to chat some more? Do we want to call it an episode?
I mean, I think we should be trying to always aim for that 1 hour mark. We can certainly talk about many
Trying
other
and
topics,
failing.
but yeah, yeah. But I think we can call it again. I think if we get some feedback on this format, maybe we can
Yep.
even have, check-ins at a
Yeah.
different date,
Mhm.
in a week or something like that, where it would be a little bit more frequent than, we've been doing. If people are interested in these conversations, again, we welcome all questions through LinkedIn, YouTube, or even afterwards. I think it's fairly easy to find us through the website, through the podcast as well. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, maybe topics that we want to
Mhm.
discuss, that would be very appreciated. But yeah, Dave, do you have any? I would say that I'm very down to close this off. Any last
Absolutely.
comments, thoughts?
No, no, I would agree with Vlad. If you guys like this, so these episodes, at least on the podcast, tend to do the best, right? The Vlad and I talking tend to do the best, plus 20 or plus 30% for whatever reason. If you guys want this more often, please let us know and we will find opportunities to do more of these where we talk, we answer your questions, we kind of give you updates on this. Part of our goal at the beginning was to talk about kind of what we're doing and to some extent document our journey for people going through it with us, but also for people who may be coming, up in the next, year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever that looks like. But no, thank you guys all. Again, this has been episode 32 of Meet Dave and this guy Vlad on Manufacturing Hub. Thank you to everyone watching live. Please feel free to go ahead and give us, a thumbs up. Go ahead and react. Go ahead and subscribe to our LinkedIn's, to the Manufacturing Hub page. Go ahead to subscribe to Solus PLC. It's my goal that next week we are able to talk about kind of the first giveaway that we want to do one way or another, and we're excited about that. But until next week, we'll talk to all you soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye bye.